In this case, citizens of this island express that democratic right in a fair, transparent review of the evidence, and the court has made a determination. Mr. Speaker, whilst the applicant may not have been successful, it is democracy that has emerged the victor. The government's case met the required tests, and the evidence provided in support of the actions taken to keep this country safe has satisfied the Supreme Court of Bermuda of its foundation in Bermuda law and the Bermuda Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the determination of this matter in the courts now provides the opportunity for the government to continue to revise policies that meet the public health situation presented in this period of the pandemic and reflect the success of our vaccination program. Mr. Speaker, governance during a once-in-a-century pandemic is challenging, and policymakers must be nimble to adapt to changing circumstances. In the 3 months since the government's quarantine policy was first announced, Bermuda is in a different situation. 3 months ago, we were in the midst of a third wave, which took 21 persons from us, and the government was required to implement strong action to break chains of transmission. 3 months ago, schools, nurseries, restaurants, gyms, beauty salons, barbershops, movie theaters were all closed. Mr. Speaker, 3 months later, Bermuda is open. Our balanced policies, which have been confirmed by the courts as lawful, again see us being the envy of the world. Our airlines are full, our hotels are employing people, our local economy is rebounding, and a vast majority of the people are following the laws that have been judged by our court as constitutional and judged by our country's pandemic performance as effective. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago, just 37% of the population were fully immunized. Today, that number stands at just under 65%. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda is one of the few countries that has not required vaccinations in any circumstances. Many of our fellow overseas territories have required work holders to be vaccinated. Not Bermuda. We have remained consistent with the message that vaccination is a personal choice between the individual and their doctor. Mr. Speaker, I am proud of the progress that we have made and proud of our persistence in sticking to the principle of leaving vaccinations up to the individual to choose. Mr. Speaker, no one likes to limit rights and freedoms of individuals. It is the last thing that a government wishes to do. However, as we have seen time and time again, and as we are seeing now around the world, governments that do not take the virus seriously end up worse off with more restrictions, a weaker economy, more suffering of people, and increased death. Mr. Speaker, now that the judgment has been rendered, I am able to advise honorable members and the public that as we approach 65% of the total population being fully immunized, there will be revisions to the approach to the policy on supervised quarantine. Mr. Speaker, it is my expectation that as soon as next week, we'll be positioned to announce these changes, setting out clearly how we can pivot on the basis of the success of our vaccination program and the effectiveness achieved in mitigating the risk against dangerous variants entering the Bermuda population. Mr. Speaker, these changes will address adjustments that can be made immediately, changes that will come into place when we reach 65% of our population being immunized, and most importantly, what the supervised quarantine regime will look like when 70% of the population are immunized or when the current quarantine order expires on September the 30th. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to the feedback that the government has received from members of my parliamentary caucus, members of the public, and those persons who have given reasoned and thoughtful feedback in a respectful fashion that is befitting our democracy. I am confident that the roadmap that we will share will address some valid concerns that have been raised and will be appropriate to ensure that as our vaccination rates rise, our policies are suitably adjusted. Mr. Speaker, as I close, I am bound to express my thanks to Queen's Counsel, Mr. Delroy Duncan, and his team who led the government's case. The Deputy Solicitor General, Ms. Shakira Dill-Francois, the Honorable Member, the Minister of Health, the Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Strategy Officer, the Permanent Secretary of Health, Drs. Karika Weldon and Dr. Joanna Peden for their invaluable expert evidence provided to assist the court. Mr. Speaker, this is an important case. The precedent it sets will no doubt be cited for many years and in many courts. Bermuda is fortunate to have a judicial system that can determine complex and sensitive cases in a timely manner. This case is now over. The government's policy has been tested and withstood that challenge. Now, as a country, Mr. Speaker, we must move forward in the spirit of collective unity of purpose that it is required for our island home to move beyond this pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, the Honorable Premier David Burt. The statement, Mr. Burt, will you move us to motion to adjourn? Adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that this honorable House do now adjourn until Friday.